In small-town Oakridge, Ohio, a 58-year-old elementary school principal was about to confront the unimaginable when she received what should have been a routine wedding invitation. What began as a typical mother-daughter relationship escalated into heartbreak when she faced the devastating truth that her only daughter had told her not to attend the wedding because she would ruin it. Eleanor Parker wasn't your typical excluded mother of the bride. For 31 years, she had dedicated her life to nurturing children as an educator, known for her unwavering compassion and quiet strength beneath her warm smile. When she discovered her daughter Charlotte had uninvited her from the wedding over superficial concerns about appearance and embarrassing stories, she had no idea she was stepping into a battle that would expose deep-seated family dynamics affecting not just her own family but countless others. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Parker had always prided herself on being present for her children, and today was no exception. She checked her mailbox at exactly 4 p.m., just as she had done every day since moving into her modest two-story home in Oakridge 27 years ago. The neighborhood was peaceful, lined with maple trees just beginning to show their autumn colors. Eleanor's garden, with its carefully tended roses and hydrangeas, had won the local garden club award 3 years running. Today, however, as she sorted through bills and advertisements, her attention fixed on a cream-colored envelope with elegant calligraphy. Her daughter Charlotte's wedding invitation had finally arrived. Eleanor felt a flutter of excitement as she carried it inside, setting her teacher's tote bag down by the door. At 58, Eleanor maintained the organized precision that had served her well through 3 decades in education. Her silver-streaked brown hair was styled in a practical bob, and laugh lines framed eyes that had witnessed countless children grow and flourish under her guidance. The living room where she settled to open the invitation was modestly furnished but immaculately kept. Photos lined the mantel: Charlotte's graduation from Cornell, her son Michael's military commissioning ceremony, family vacations to the Outer Banks, and one treasured photo of Eleanor with her late husband James before cancer had taken him 7 years ago. With careful fingers, Eleanor slid open the envelope, admiring the quality of the paper and the delicate design. Charlotte had always had exquisite taste, something Eleanor had encouraged even when it strained her principal's salary. The invitation announced the union of Charlotte Eleanor Parker and Brendan James Whitaker in what promised to be the social event of the season at the prestigious Whitaker family estate. Eleanor smiled, tracing her finger over her daughter's name. Charlotte had been named after Eleanor's grandmother, maintaining a family tradition. She reached for her phone to call Charlotte and share her excitement when it rang in her hand. Charlotte's name flashed on the screen. "Perfect timing, sweetheart," Eleanor answered warmly. "I just opened your invitation. Everything looks beautiful." The silence on the other end lasted a beat too long. "Mom," Charlotte's voice carried a tension Eleanor recognized from childhood discussions about difficult report cards. "That's actually why I'm calling." Eleanor settled deeper into her armchair, a sense of unease replacing her excitement. "Is everything all right with the wedding plans?" "The plans are fine. Perfect, actually." Charlotte's voice had taken on the clipped, professional tone she used at her marketing firm. "But there's something we need to discuss about your participation." Eleanor listened as her daughter launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about the wedding being featured in Ohio Social Magazine, about the Whitaker family's prominence in Cincinnati business circles, about image and presentation, and expectations. "Charlotte, sweetheart, I'm not following. What exactly are you concerned about?" Eleanor interrupted, confusion clouding her initial joy. The sigh from the other end of the line carried decades of unspoken tension. "Mom, Brendan's family is very image-conscious. The wedding will have state representatives, CEOs, even a senator attending. Everything needs to be perfect." Of course, Eleanor nodded, though her daughter couldn't see her. "I understand important events. I organize the district's annual fundraising gala." "This is different, Mom." Charlotte's voice sharpened. "The Whitakers are concerned about, well, frankly, they're concerned about you." Eleanor felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her. "Me? What about me concerns them?" "Your stories, Mom. The way you dress. Your enthusiasm." Charlotte's words came faster now, as if she were ripping off a bandage. "Mrs. Whitaker saw those photos from Michael's graduation party where you were dancing with the neighbors. She mentioned your clothes look provincial. And Brendan's father was concerned when you mentioned your work with underprivileged schools at our engagement dinner." Eleanor's hand tightened around the phone. "Charlotte, I've dedicated my life to education. Those underprivileged schools have produced doctors, engineers, and yes, even marketing executives. As for my dancing, this isn't about your career." "Mom," Charlotte interrupted. It's about fitting in with the world I'm entering. The Whitakers are concerned you'll tell embarrassing stories about my childhood or wear something inappropriate. Inappropriate? Eleanor echoed, her educator's voice emerging, the tone that had silenced rowdy classrooms with its quiet authority. They've hired a stylist for the entire wedding party. Everyone will be coordinated for the magazine spread. Charlotte continued as if Eleanor hadn't spoken. We're trying to create a specific aesthetic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I don't fit your aesthetic. It wasn't a question. Charlotte's silence was answer. Enough. What exactly are you asking of me, Charlotte? Eleanor's voice had gone quiet, the way it did when she was most upset, a quality her students recognized as the calm before the storm. Mrs. Whitaker suggested, Charlotte started. I'm not interested in Mrs. Whitaker's suggestions about my relationship with my daughter, Eleanor interrupted, an edge creeping into her voice. The pause that followed felt endless. When Charlotte spoke again, her voice had hardened into something Eleanor barely recognized. We think it would be best if you didn't attend the ceremony or reception. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Eleanor found herself unable to respond, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. You could still come to the rehearsal dinner, Charlotte added quickly. It's not being photographed for the magazine. And we'd send you professional photos afterward, of course. Eleanor stood from her chair, moving to the window that overlooked her garden. The roses she had planted when Charlotte was born were in full bloom, their pink petals catching the late afternoon sunlight. Let me understand, Eleanor said slowly, each word deliberate. You're uninviting me, your mother, from your wedding. Because I might embarrass you with my department store clothes and stories about your childhood? Mom, please try to understand, Charlotte's voice took on a pleading quality. This wedding is a crucial networking opportunity for both our careers. The Whitakers are introducing us to people who could change our lives. And I would ruin that for you. Again, not a question. Not ruin, Charlotte backpedaled. Just complicate. It's not personal, Mom. It's practical. Eleanor almost laughed at the absurdity. Not personal? Charlotte, this is your wedding. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you alone after your father died. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your dance lessons and SAT prep courses. And you're telling me my exclusion from the most important day of your life isn't personal? This is exactly what I'm talking about, Charlotte's voice rose. You always bring up the sacrifices you made, making me feel guilty for wanting something for myself. This is why I can't have you there, everything becomes about you and your feelings. The accusation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Had she been that kind of mother? Had her pride in Charlotte's accomplishments somehow morphed into making her daughter feel perpetually indebted? I see, was all Eleanor could manage. So you understand? Hope crept into Charlotte's voice. Eleanor looked at the invitation still open on her side table, the embossed gold lettering catching the light. 31 years of birthdays, scraped knees, homework help, college applications, and tear-soaked pillows after breakups flashed through her mind. No, Charlotte. I don't understand. Eleanor's voice was steady now, her principles resolve taking over. But I do respect that this is your decision to make. If you believe your wedding will be better without your mother present, then I won't impose myself where I'm not wanted. Mom, I'll send your gift to the address on the invitation, Eleanor continued, not allowing herself to be interrupted. I wish you and Brendan every happiness. Mom, please don't be dramatic about this, Charlotte sighed. It's just one day. Yes, Eleanor agreed, looking at the family photos on her mantel. Just one day that I've imagined since the doctor placed you in my arms. Just one day I thought I'd see my only daughter walk down the aisle. Just one day I believed I'd earned the right to witness. The silence stretched between them, 31 years of love and misunderstanding compressed into the static of a phone connection. I have a school board meeting to prepare for, Eleanor finally said. Goodbye, Charlotte. After ending the call, Eleanor sat motionless in her living room as the afternoon light shifted to evening shadows. The invitation lay open like an accusation. With careful movements, she placed it back in its envelope and set it inside her desk drawer, unable to discard it despite its implicit rejection. That night, Eleanor did something she hadn't done since James died. She pulled out a bottle of wine and drank it alone on her back porch, watching fireflies emerge in her garden as twilight settled over Oakridge. The profound rejection of her daughter's words replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. She had always believed she'd raised Charlotte to value substance over appearance, kindness over social standing. Where had she gone wrong? Or had Charlotte simply evolved into someone different, someone whose values no longer aligned with the lessons of her childhood? Eleanor's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Charlotte, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. Not tonight. Tonight belonged to her grief, to processing the knowledge that she was considered an embarrassment to the daughter she'd raised with everything she had. When the wine bottle stood empty and the night air had turned cool, Eleanor finally went inside. She moved through her quiet house with the weight of rejection heavy on her shoulders. In her home office, surrounded by teaching awards and photos of former students, Eleanor sat at her computer and did something she'd never imagined doing. She typed, "Excluded from daughter's wedding, how to cope." The search results revealed something unexpected: dozens of online forums, support groups, and articles devoted to parents who had been excluded from their children's weddings. Eleanor had assumed her situation was unusual, perhaps even unique. Instead, she discovered a hidden community of the uninvited, the unwanted, the parents deemed unsuitable for their children's milestone moments. For the next 3 hours, Eleanor read story after heartbreaking story. Fathers considered too rough around the edges, mothers deemed too religious or not religious enough, parents excluded for remarrying, for their political views, for their social class, for 1,000 reasons that all seemed to boil down to one painful truth: they didn't fit the image their children wanted to project. By the time exhaustion finally drove her to bed, Eleanor had joined an online support group and exchanged messages with several parents in similar situations. Their stories were different in detail but united by the same bewildering pain: the discovery that the children they'd raised now viewed them as liabilities rather than the foundation of their lives. The next morning, Eleanor awoke with swollen eyes and a clarity that surprised her. After 31 years of putting Charlotte's needs before her own, she found herself facing a new reality, one where her value to her daughter was measured by appearance rather than devotion. It was a brutal awakening, but Eleanor had never been one to wallow. At school, Eleanor maintained her professional demeanor, guiding her elementary school through the usual Monday challenges with the steady hand her staff had come to rely upon. If anyone noticed her reddened eyes or subdued manner, they didn't mention it. During her lunch break, she finally read Charlotte's messages from the night before. They ranged from defensive, "You're making this all about you again," to placating, "We can have a special mother-daughter lunch after the honeymoon," to angry, "This is exactly why the Whitakers are concerned about your emotional outbursts." Eleanor composed a single, measured response: "I've heard and accepted your decision. I won't be attending your wedding. I love you and wish you happiness, but I need some time to process this change in our relationship. Please respect my space." After sending the message, Eleanor blocked Charlotte's number, not permanently, but for now. She needed boundaries to protect her heart while she figured out what came next. That evening, Eleanor attended her scheduled school board meeting. The main agenda item was the district's proposal to cut funding for arts education due to budget constraints. Under normal circumstances, Eleanor would have presented a passionate but measured defense of keeping the programs intact. Tonight, with her personal life in shambles, she found herself approaching the podium with a different energy. For 31 years, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I've advocated for children to receive an education that values not just what they can achieve, but who they can become. The arts teach our children that their worth isn't measured by standardized tests or economic metrics, but by their capacity for creativity, empathy, and authentic self-expression." The board members, used to Eleanor's typically diplomatic presentations, sat up straighter as she continued. "I've spent my career watching children transform when they discover that their value doesn't depend on fitting someone else's narrow definition of success. I've seen struggling students find their voice through music, poetry, and paint when words failed them. And today, I find myself wondering what message we send when we tell these same children that these parts of themselves are expendable, unworthy of funding, embarrassing in the face of more practical concerns." Eleanor hadn't intended to connect the district's budget decisions to her personal situation, but the parallels were undeniable. As she spoke about the damage done when children are taught to value appearance over substance, her words carried the weight of fresh wounds. "When we cut arts programs, we tell our children that conformity matters more than creativity, that fitting in is more important than standing out. We tell them their authentic selves are somehow less valuable than the standardized versions we can more easily measure and control." By the time Eleanor finished speaking, the meeting room had fallen completely silent. Board members who had arrived prepared to make practical budget cuts found themselves confronted with the human cost of those decisions, delivered by a woman whose passion had clearly been fueled by something beyond professional concern. Later that week, Eleanor received a call from Margot Wilson, a local journalist who had been covering the school board meeting for the Oakridge Gazette. "That was quite a speech you gave," Margot said after introducing herself. "The board voted unanimously to preserve arts funding. People are still talking about it." Eleanor thanked her politely, assuming the call was simply a follow-up for Margot's article. "But that's not why I'm calling," Margot continued. "There was something in your speech that resonated with me personally. The way you talked about valuing authenticity over appearances, it felt like you were speaking from someplace raw and real. Eleanor hesitated, unaccustomed to discussing personal matters with strangers. But something about Margot's perceptiveness broke through her usual reserve. My daughter has uninvited me from her wedding, Eleanor admitted, the words still painful to speak aloud. Apparently, I don't fit the aesthetic they're creating for the society pages. The silence on the other end of the line lasted just a moment. Miss Parker, would you be willing to share your story for a feature I'm working on? Not about your daughter specifically, but about the larger issue of authenticity versus appearance in our relationships and celebrations? Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. Airing private matters in public went against everything she believed about dignity and discretion. But then she thought about the online forums she'd discovered, filled with parents suffering in silence. Believing their exclusion was unique, shameful, something to be hidden. What kind of feature? Eleanor asked cautiously. I've been researching how social media and wedding magazines have transformed celebrations from meaningful personal milestones into performance art, Margot explained. Your situation highlights the human cost of this shift. I believe your perspective as an educator could add valuable insight. Eleanor agreed to meet Margot for coffee the following day at Oakridge Beans, a local cafe far enough from her usual haunts that she was unlikely to encounter colleagues or parents from school. As she prepared for the interview, Eleanor wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. Would speaking publicly about her situation only widen the rift with Charlotte? Was she violating her daughter's privacy by sharing their conflict, even anonymously? These questions still troubled her as she sat across from Margot Wilson, a thoughtful woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a recorder placed discreetly between them. But as Eleanor began to speak, something unexpected happened. The act of articulating her experience, the shock, the hurt, the confusion, began to transform her understanding of it. I've spent my life teaching children that their worth comes from who they are, not how they appear, Eleanor explained. I believed I was modeling those values for my own daughter. Finding out that she sees me as an embarrassment rather than as the mother who has supported her unconditionally. It's made me question everything about our relationship. And how are you coping with that realization? Margot asked, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. Eleanor considered the question carefully. I'm grieving, she said finally. Not just for missing her wedding, but for the relationship I thought we had. I'm grieving the discovery that my daughter values social connections and appearances more than authenticity. And I'm trying to understand my own role in creating the situation. As the interview progressed, Eleanor found herself sharing insights she hadn't fully articulated even to herself, about the pressure parents face to produce successful children, about how social media has transformed private celebrations into public performances, about the corrosive effect of valuing appearance over substance. The most painful part, Eleanor confided, is realizing that in trying to give Charlotte everything, I may have failed to give her what matters most, an appreciation for authenticity and the courage to be herself even when it's uncomfortable. When the interview concluded 2 hours later, Eleanor felt strangely lighter. Margot promised to send her the article before publication and assured her that all identifying details would be changed to protect privacy. Thank you for your candor, Margot said as they parted. I think your story will resonate with more people than you might expect. Eleanor doubted that. Her situation felt uniquely painful, a singular rejection that had shaken her identity as a mother and as a person. She couldn't imagine her private heartbreak would have meaning for others beyond perhaps a moment of sympathy or voyeuristic interest. How wrong she would prove to be. 3 days later, Margot's article appeared in the weekend edition of the Oakridge Gazette. Titled, The Uninvited, When Parents Don't Make the Guest List, it featured Eleanor's story prominently, though under the pseudonym Elizabeth. The article explored the growing trend of excluding parents from weddings for reasons ranging from family conflicts to aesthetic considerations, connecting it to broader social pressures and the commodification of milestone events. Eleanor read it with a strange detachment, as if Elizabeth's story belonged to someone else entirely. Margot had captured her pain accurately but had also placed it within a larger context that made Eleanor realize she wasn't alone in her experience. The article concluded with a poignant quote from Elizabeth. Perhaps the greatest gift I can give my daughter now is to respect her choice while refusing to diminish myself to fit someone else's expectations. I won't pretend this doesn't hurt deeply, but I also won't apologize for being exactly who I am, a mother who loves imperfectly but completely. Eleanor hadn't quite reached that place of acceptance when she'd spoken those words, but seeing them in print, she recognized their truth. She placed the newspaper on her kitchen table and prepared to spend a quiet Saturday in her garden, assuming the article would quickly fade from public attention. By mid-morning, her phone was ringing with calls from unfamiliar numbers. Her email Inbox filled with messages from strangers. Parents who had been excluded from their children's weddings, graduations, and other milestone events reached out to share their stories and to thank Elizabeth for giving voice to their pain. One message in particular caught Eleanor's attention, from a woman named Diane who had been uninvited from her son's wedding 3 years earlier. Diane had subsequently founded a support group called Celebrations of Authenticity for parents navigating these painful exclusions. The group not only provided emotional support but also organized alternative celebrations that honored authentic relationships over perfect appearances. "Would you consider speaking at our next gathering?" Diane asked. Your perspective as an educator adds an important dimension to this conversation. Eleanor's first instinct was to decline. She had never sought the spotlight, had always preferred working quietly behind the scenes to ensure her students' success. But something about Diane's invitation resonated with the part of Eleanor that had always believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Before she could reply, another message arrived, this one from Dr. Lillian Hayes, a family psychologist who specialized in intergenerational conflicts. Dr. Hayes was hosting a podcast series on modern family dynamics and wanted to interview Eleanor about the educational perspective on what she called the authenticity crisis in parent-child relationships. By Sunday evening, Eleanor had received 17 interview requests, over 40 messages from excluded parents, and an invitation to speak at a regional education conference about the connection between educational values and family dynamics. The private pain she had been nursing in isolation had somehow transformed into a platform for a conversation many people apparently needed to have. As Eleanor prepared for the school week ahead, she found herself at a crossroads. She could decline these requests, protect her privacy, and continue processing her exclusion from Charlotte's wedding in isolation. Or she could step into a role she had never anticipated, as a voice for authentic relationships in an age increasingly dominated by appearance and performance. The decision she would make that evening would not only change her own story but would ultimately create ripples that would reach far beyond Oakridge, touching families across the state and eventually leading to an unexpected reconciliation she couldn't yet imagine. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table Monday morning, staring at her phone with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The device had barely stopped buzzing since Margot's article was published. She had spent Sunday evening carefully considering her options, weighing her natural inclination toward privacy against the unexpected opportunity to address an issue that clearly resonated with many people. With steady fingers, she dialed Diane from Celebrations of Authenticity first. "I'd be willing to speak at your gathering," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "But I want to be clear, this isn't about criticizing my daughter. It's about helping parents navigate the pain of exclusion while maintaining their dignity and self-worth." By the time she arrived at Oakridge Elementary, Eleanor had agreed to 3 interviews and a speaking engagement. She felt simultaneously energized and terrified by these commitments, so far outside her usual routine of lesson plans and budget meetings. As she walked through the school's main entrance, the familiar sounds of children's laughter and morning announcements grounded her. "Good morning, Ms. Parker," called Janice Thompson, the school secretary who had worked with Eleanor for over a decade. "You're causing quite a stir around town. My sister called me yesterday to ask if I knew the mysterious Elizabeth from the article." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. News travels fast in Oakridge. "Especially good news," Janice said with unexpected firmness. "It's about time someone spoke up about the wedding industry turning people into props instead of participants." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of school board president Richard Gable, a normally reserved man who now approached Eleanor with unusual animation. "Eleanor, that article, it's generated quite a response. The board's received 17 emails praising your candor, and the superintendent called to say you've put Oakridge on the map in a way that reflects our values as a district." Eleanor hadn't considered how her sudden visibility might affect the school. "I hope this won't cause problems for the district." The article was meant to be anonymous, small towns, Richard shrugged. "But I want you to know the board supports you fully. In fact, several members suggested you might incorporate these themes of authenticity versus appearance into your address at next month's educational conference." The idea hadn't occurred to Eleanor, but it made intuitive sense. The values conflict she was experiencing in her personal life directly paralleled issues she'd been addressing throughout her educational career, the tension between authentic learning and standardized performance, between developing character and accumulating accolades. "I'll consider it," she promised, just as the morning bell rang. The day passed in a blur of administrative tasks and student interactions, the normalcy a welcome respite from the weekend's emotional tumult. After dismissal, Eleanor met with her leadership team to discuss upcoming projects, trying to maintain her usual focus despite the transformation happening in her personal life. As the meeting concluded, Gabriela Martinez, the art teacher who had been at Oakridge Elementary nearly as long as Eleanor, lingered behind. "I recognized you in that article," Gabriela said once they were alone. "Not just because of the obvious clues, but because what Elizabeth said sounded exactly like the Eleanor Parker I've known for 20 years. Eleanor sighed, setting down her pen. "I didn't anticipate becoming the face of excluded parents." "Maybe that's exactly why you should be," Gabriela suggested, perching on the edge of Eleanor's desk as she had done during countless after-school conversations. "You're not bitter or vengeful. You're hurt, yes, but you're approaching this with the same thoughtfulness you bring to everything. People need that perspective." "I'm still figuring out how to process my own feelings," Eleanor admitted. "I'm not sure I'm qualified to guide others." "Who better?" Gabriela challenged. "You've spent your career helping children navigate difficult emotions and complex social situations. Now you're doing it for adults who've been hurt by their own children. It's the same work, Eleanor, just with a different audience." The comparison gave Eleanor pause. She had never considered her educational expertise might be relevant to her current personal crisis, but Gabriela was right. The skills she'd developed over 31 years in education, empathetic listening, thoughtful guidance, helping others find meaning in painful experiences, were exactly what excluded parents needed. "Thank you," Eleanor said finally. "I think I needed that perspective." Gabriela smiled. "That's what friends are for. Now, are we still on for book club tomorrow night? Or are you too famous now for us regular folks?" The gentle teasing broke the tension, and Eleanor laughed for what felt like the first time in days. "I'll bring the wine. And I promise not to sign any autographs." After Gabriela left, Eleanor opened her email to find a message from Dr. Lillian Hayes confirming their podcast interview for the following week. The topic had been refined: authentic parenting in an age of performance, when children reject their parents' values. The title struck Eleanor with unexpected force. Was that what had happened with Charlotte? Had her daughter rejected the values Eleanor thought they shared, or had Eleanor somehow failed to truly instill those values in the first place? The question haunted her as she drove home through Oakridge's tree-lined streets, past the park where she had pushed Charlotte on the swings, the library where they'd spent rainy Saturday afternoons, the ice cream shop where they'd celebrated school achievements. Every corner of this town held memories of the relationship she had believed was unshakable. At home, Eleanor found 3 voice messages waiting. The first was from her son Michael, calling from his military base in Texas. "Mom, I just heard from Charlotte about the wedding situation. I can't believe she's doing this to you. I told her she's making a huge mistake, but you know how stubborn she gets when she thinks she's moving up in the world. Anyway, I want you to know I'm on your side. Call me when you can." Eleanor felt a complex surge of emotions. Gratitude for Michael's support mingled with concern that her children were being forced to take sides. That was the last thing she wanted. The second message was from Charlotte herself, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Mom, I don't know what you're playing at with this newspaper article, but the Whitakers are livid. Mrs. Whitaker recognized details about our situation even with the names changed. How could you do this to me? This is exactly the kind of drama I was trying to avoid by asking you not to come to the wedding. Call me back immediately." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she deleted the message. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet, not while Charlotte was seeing only how her mother's actions affected her wedding plans rather than understanding the deep wound her exclusion had inflicted. The third message surprised her most of all, from Benjamin Whitaker, Brendan's father and the family patriarch whose opinion Charlotte valued so highly. "Miss Parker, this is Benjamin Whitaker. I think we need to talk. Please call me at your earliest convenience." He left a number and hung up without further explanation. Eleanor stared at her phone, unsure how to respond. What could Brendan's father possibly want to discuss with her? Was this an attempt to pressure her into silence, to prevent further embarrassment to their family's carefully curated image? After a moment's hesitation, she decided directness was the best approach. She dialed the number and waited, rehearsing diplomatic responses in her head. "Miss Parker," Benjamin Whitaker's voice was deep and authoritative, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. "Thank you for returning my call." "Mr. Whitaker," Eleanor acknowledged, keeping her tone neutral. "How can I help you?" "I believe we may have gotten off on the wrong foot," he said, surprising her. "Or more accurately, my wife and I have created a situation that has spiraled beyond our intentions." Eleanor remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I read the article in the Oakridge Gazette," Benjamin continued after a moment. "A colleague forwarded it to me, actually. He didn't know Elizabeth was you, but he thought the piece raised important points about authenticity in family relationships. This was not the conversation Eleanor had anticipated. "I see," she said carefully. "Miss Parker, my wife comes from a background where appearance has always mattered tremendously. She's carried those values into our family life, and I've allowed it because it seemed harmless enough. But reading that article made me question whether we've done our son a disservice by emphasizing image over substance." The candor in his voice sounded genuine, but Eleanor remained cautious. "Mr. Whitaker, I appreciate your reflection, but I'm not sure what you're asking of me." "I'm not asking anything," he replied. "I'm offering an apology. My wife's concerns about your participation in the wedding were superficial and wrong. I should have spoken up sooner rather than allowing Charlotte to uninvite her own mother based on such shallow considerations." Eleanor hadn't expected this acknowledgement, and she found herself momentarily speechless. "That said," Benjamin continued, "I don't believe I can change Charlotte's mind at this point. She's convinced herself this is about something larger than your clothes or your stories. She's framed it as establishing boundaries and independence from parental influence." "I understand," Eleanor said, though the pain of Charlotte's rejection remained fresh. "I've accepted her decision, Mr. Whitaker. I won't be attending the wedding." "And that's your right," he acknowledged. "But I wanted you to know that not everyone in our family shares the view that you would somehow detract from the celebration. In fact, quite the opposite. A parent who has supported their child unconditionally belongs at their wedding, regardless of what designer they're wearing." The conversation ended cordially, with Benjamin expressing hope that the situation might eventually resolve itself in a way that preserved both the wedding plans and the mother-daughter relationship. Eleanor appreciated his gesture but remained realistic about the likelihood of reconciliation before the rapidly approaching wedding date. That evening, Eleanor finally read the dozens of messages she had received from parents who had connected with her story. Their experiences varied widely: mothers excluded for their weight or age, fathers uninvited because they weren't sophisticated enough, parents rejected for religious beliefs, political views, or simply for being too emotional at previous family gatherings. What struck Eleanor most powerfully was the isolation these parents described. Many had told no one about their exclusion, carrying the rejection as a secret shame. They had questioned their worth as parents and as people, wondering what fundamental flaw made them unworthy of witnessing their children's milestone moments. Eleanor began responding to each message individually, drawing on her decades of experience helping people through difficult emotional terrain. She offered no easy solutions or hollow reassurances, just acknowledgement of their pain and affirmation of their intrinsic worth beyond their children's temporary rejection. By midnight, Eleanor had formulated a framework for her upcoming talk at the Celebrations of Authenticity gathering. It wouldn't focus on grievances or victimhood, but on reclaiming personal value and creating meaningful lives even when important relationships became conditional or disconnected. The following day brought another surprise: an email from Olivia Chen, a doctoral student in sociology at Ohio State University, requesting permission to interview Eleanor for her dissertation on the commercialization of life milestones and its impact on family dynamics. "Your experience captures the collision between authentic family relationships and the increasing pressure to create perfect, celebratory performances," Olivia wrote. "I believe your perspective as both an educator and an excluded mother offers unique insights into this cultural shift." Eleanor agreed to the interview, which was scheduled for the following week at the university. She found herself strangely energized by these unexpected opportunities to transform her personal pain into something meaningful that might help others navigate similar experiences. That night, at her monthly book club meeting with fellow educators, Eleanor was met with a wave of supportive comments about the article. These women had known her for years, had watched her raise Charlotte as a single mother after James's death, had celebrated her daughter's achievements alongside her. "I never would have believed Charlotte capable of this," said Margaret Whiting, the retired high school English teacher who had taught Charlotte AP Literature. "She was always such a thoughtful student, so aware of deeper meanings beyond surface appearances." "People change," Gabriela Martinez observed. "Sometimes the values we think we've instilled don't stick, or they get overshadowed by other influences. The question is," added Sofia Ramirez, the district librarian, "what happens next? Charlotte made her choice, painful as it is. But Eleanor, you have choices too. About how to respond, about what kind of relationship you want going forward, about what boundaries you need to protect yourself." The conversation shifted from Eleanor's specific situation to broader questions about parental expectations, adult children's autonomy, and the challenges of maintaining authentic relationships in a culture increasingly driven by external validation and carefully curated images. "Maybe that's the real opportunity here," suggested Rebecca Klein, who taught psychology at the local community college. To model for Charlotte and others what it looks like to respond to rejection with dignity rather than desperation, to stand in your truth without diminishing others. Eleanor considered this perspective carefully. I've been so focused on what I've lost, my role in Charlotte's wedding, my image of our relationship, my understanding of the values she holds. But maybe there's something to be gained here too, a deeper understanding of myself apart from my identity as Charlotte's mother. The support of these women, who had known Eleanor through every phase of her professional and personal life, strengthened her resolve to approach her unexpected public platform with intention and integrity. She would speak her truth without vilifying Charlotte or the Whitakers, focusing instead on the broader cultural forces that had transformed weddings from celebrations of authentic commitment to performances of aspirational identity. The podcast interview with Dr. Lillian Hayes took place the following Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor had prepared carefully, reviewing the psychologist's previous work on family dynamics and intergenerational conflicts. The conversation quickly moved beyond Eleanor's specific situation to explore the educational implications of prioritizing appearance over authenticity. In my 31 years as an educator, Eleanor explained, I've watched children struggle under increasing pressure to craft perfect personas rather than develop authentic selves. Social media has accelerated this trend, but it begins much earlier, with parents who praise performance over process, who value achievements over growth, who implicitly teach their children that how things look matters more than how things actually are. And you see this manifesting in wedding culture? Dr. Hayes prompted. Weddings have become the ultimate performance, Eleanor observed. Magazine-worthy events where authenticity is often sacrificed at the altar of aesthetics. When parents don't fit the desired image, because they're too emotional, too ordinary, too real, they become inconvenient truths to be managed rather than honored participants. What's the educational antidote to this trend? Dr. Hayes asked. Eleanor leaned forward, her passion for this topic evident in her voice. We need to deliberately teach and model authenticity. Children learn what we emphasize, and if we consistently value substance over style, depth over display, they internalize those priorities. This means celebrating effort over outcome, praising honesty over impression management, and creating spaces where children can be fully themselves without fear of judgment. The interview continued for nearly an hour, covering topics from social media's impact on identity formation to practical strategies for fostering authenticity in both educational settings and family relationships. When it concluded, Dr. Hayes thanked Eleanor warmly. This conversation goes far beyond wedding disputes, the psychologist noted. You're addressing fundamental questions about how we raise children to value themselves and others. I believe your perspective will resonate deeply with our listeners. The podcast was scheduled to be released the following week, just days before Charlotte's wedding. Eleanor felt a mixture of pride in articulating values she had long held and apprehension about how her increased visibility might affect her already strained relationship with her daughter. That concern was validated the next morning when she received another angry voicemail from Charlotte. Mom, people are starting to talk about you not being invited to my wedding. Mrs. Whitaker's friends are asking questions. This is becoming exactly the kind of embarrassing spectacle I was trying to avoid. Why can't you just respect my wishes? Without turning it into some kind of crusade? Eleanor deleted the message without responding. Charlotte still didn't understand, or refused to acknowledge, that this wasn't about seeking attention or revenge. It was about finding meaning and purpose in a painful rejection, about helping other excluded parents feel less alone, about addressing a cultural trend that prioritized perfection over authentic connection. The sociology interview at Ohio State proved even more thought-provoking than Eleanor had anticipated. Olivia Chen approached the topic with scholarly rigor but also personal interest, revealing that her own grandmother had been excluded from her mother's wedding for similar reasons. What's fascinating from a sociological perspective, Olivia explained as they sat in her small campus office, is how this phenomenon cuts across cultural and socioeconomic lines. We're seeing it in wealthy families concerned about appearances, and in middle-class families attempting to project upward mobility. The common thread is the transformation of weddings from community celebrations into statements of identity and aspiration. Eleanor found herself engaging with the topic from an academic perspective, temporarily distancing herself from the personal pain to consider the broader implications. In education, we talk about performative learning versus authentic understanding. Students who learn to display knowledge for evaluation rather than truly integrating it. Perhaps what we're seeing with weddings is a similar shift toward performative celebration. Exactly, Olivia nodded enthusiastically. And the consequences for family relationships can be profound. When authentic connection is sacrificed for performative perfection, something fundamental is lost, not just for the excluded parents but for the couple themselves. The interview concluded with Olivia asking a question that caught Eleanor off guard: if you could send one message to couples planning weddings today, what would it be? Eleanor considered carefully before responding. Remember that perfection is the enemy of authenticity. A wedding lasts a day, but family relationships endure for decades. Choose inclusion over image, substance over style, and meaningful connections over magazine-worthy moments. Because 20 years from now, what you'll treasure most are the genuine emotions and relationships that were present, not how everything looked in the photos. As Eleanor drove back to Oakridge that evening, she realized she had experienced a subtle but significant shift in her perspective. The pain of Charlotte's rejection remained, but it was no longer consuming her. Instead, she had found purpose in using her experience to illuminate larger truths about authenticity, connection, and what truly matters in both education and family life. The Celebrations of Authenticity gathering was scheduled for Saturday, just 1 week before Charlotte's wedding. Eleanor had prepared her remarks carefully, focusing on practical strategies for maintaining self-worth and creating meaningful alternatives when excluded from important family events. What she hadn't prepared for was the size of the audience. When she arrived at the community center in Columbus, Eleanor was startled to find nearly 200 people waiting: excluded parents, adult children seeking to understand family conflicts, therapists, clergy members, and others interested in the increasingly common phenomenon of wedding exclusion. Diane, the group's founder, greeted Eleanor warmly. "Your story has touched a nerve," she explained as she led Eleanor to the staging area. "We typically get 30 or 40 people at these gatherings. Your willingness to speak publicly about your experience has encouraged others to break their silence too." Looking out at the audience from behind the small podium, Eleanor felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. She was accustomed to speaking to parents and school boards, not addressing personal topics to a crowd of strangers. But as she began to speak, her educator's instincts took over, and she found herself approaching the topic with the same thoughtful clarity she brought to discussions of curriculum or child development. "When my daughter told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding," Eleanor began, "my first reaction was shame. What kind of mother raises a daughter who doesn't want her present on the most important day of her life? What fundamental failure did this represent?" But as I've reflected on this experience and connected with others in similar situations, I've come to understand that these exclusions often say more about cultural pressures than about the quality of our parenting or the depth of our love. For the next 45 minutes, Eleanor shared insights about navigating the pain of exclusion while maintaining dignity and self-worth. She spoke about creating meaningful alternative celebrations, establishing appropriate boundaries, and keeping doors open for future reconciliation without sacrificing personal integrity. The greatest challenge, she noted toward the end of her talk, is to hold two seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously: that our children's rejection causes genuine pain, and that their rejection does not define our worth as parents or as people. We can acknowledge the hurt without being consumed by it. We can love our children unconditionally while still requiring basic respect for ourselves. The response was overwhelming. As Eleanor concluded her remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation, many wiping away tears. The Q&A session that followed revealed the depth of pain many attendees had been carrying silently, sometimes for years, believing their exclusion was unique or somehow deserved. Afterward, as Eleanor spoke individually with attendees, a local news crew approached, requesting a brief interview for their human interest segment. Though initially hesitant, Eleanor agreed, recognizing another opportunity to address this issue thoughtfully for a broader audience. "Ms. Parker," the young reporter began, "your talk today clearly resonated with many people. Why do you think wedding exclusions have become so common?" "I believe we're seeing the consequences of several cultural shifts," Eleanor replied. "The commercialization of weddings has transformed them from family celebrations into productions where every element must contribute to a cohesive aesthetic. Social media has created pressure for picture-perfect events that generate maximum engagement. And as a society, we've increasingly prioritized individual expression over family obligation. What advice would you give to parents who find themselves in your situation?" Eleanor smiled gently. "First, don't take it personally, even though it feels intensely personal. Second, surround yourself with supportive people who affirm your worth beyond your role as a parent. And finally, find meaning in the experience by connecting with others who understand and by using your story to promote more authentic celebrations of life's important moments." As Eleanor drove home that evening, she felt both emotionally drained and strangely peaceful. The exclusion from Charlotte's wedding still hurt, but the wound was no longer raw and bleeding. By sharing her experience, by connecting it to larger cultural patterns, by helping others navigate similar pain, she had transformed her private rejection into something meaningful and purposeful. Little did she know that her public speaking was about to create ripples that would reach directly into the carefully choreographed plans for Charlotte's wedding, setting the stage for an unexpected confrontation and an even more surprising resolution. The local news segment featuring Eleanor aired on Monday evening, 3 days after the celebrations of authenticity gathering and just 5 days before Charlotte's wedding. Eleanor watched it alone in her living room, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands as the young reporter introduced her story. When Eleanor Parker was uninvited from her daughter's wedding for not fitting the aesthetic, she could have retreated into private hurt. Instead, she sparked a movement helping excluded parents reclaim their dignity and worth. The 3-minute segment was thoughtfully edited, focusing on the broader cultural issues rather than the personal details of Eleanor's situation. The final shot showed Eleanor speaking directly to the camera. "We teach children that character matters more than appearance, that authenticity trumps perfection. But when we exclude family members from celebrations because they don't fit our curated image, we undermine those very values. Perhaps it's time to reimagine weddings as authentic celebrations of love rather than performances of aspiration." Eleanor switched off the television with mixed emotions. She had represented herself well and spoken about important issues with clarity and compassion. Yet watching the segment made the reality of her situation impossible to ignore. In 5 days, her only daughter would be getting married without her mother present. She was reaching for her phone to call Michael when it rang in her hand. An unfamiliar number with a Cincinnati area code. "Ms. Parker? This is Victoria Whitaker." Eleanor nearly dropped the phone. Brendan's mother, the woman whose concerns about Eleanor's provincial appearance had catalyzed this entire situation, was the last person she expected to hear from. "Mrs. Whitaker," Eleanor acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral. "How can I help you?" "I saw your interview on Channel 7, Victoria said, her tone clipped but not hostile. "You're quite articulate." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I wanted to speak with you directly," Victoria continued after a brief pause. "My husband seems to think I've been unnecessarily rigid about certain aspects of the wedding planning." Eleanor remained silent, allowing Victoria to continue. "Charlotte admires you enormously, you know. She's always talking about your accomplishments, your influence on your community. It's clear she values your approval, perhaps more than she's willing to admit." This insight into Charlotte's perspective surprised Eleanor. Their recent interactions had given no indication that her daughter valued her opinion or approval at all. "Mrs. Whitaker, Victoria, please." "Victoria," Eleanor amended, "I appreciate your call, but I'm not sure what you're asking of me." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not asking anything, Ms. Parker. I'm acknowledging that my concerns about the wedding aesthetics were perhaps misplaced. Benjamin and I have been discussing the situation, and we agree that Charlotte should reconsider her decision to exclude you." Eleanor took a deep breath, processing this unexpected development. "While I appreciate that sentiment, this needs to be Charlotte's decision. I won't attend where I'm not genuinely wanted." "Of course," Victoria agreed quickly. "I just wanted you to know that from our perspective, you would be welcome. The rest is between you and Charlotte." After the call ended, Eleanor sat motionless, absorbing this shift in the dynamics. Victoria Whitaker's acknowledgement, while not quite an apology, represented a significant change in perspective. But would it influence Charlotte? And did Eleanor even want to attend a wedding where her presence had been so clearly deemed problematic? She didn't have long to contemplate these questions. Her phone lit up with a text from Charlotte. "We need to talk. Dinner tomorrow? 7 p.m. at Bellini's." Eleanor typed a simple response, "I'll be there." Bellini's was an upscale Italian restaurant on the outskirts of Oakridge, a neutral territory that offered both privacy and the civilizing influence of a public setting. Eleanor arrived precisely at 7, dressed in a navy blue dress that she knew looked professional and appropriate without being fashion-forward. This wasn't about proving anything through her appearance, but she wasn't above a subtle statement about her ordinary clothes being perfectly acceptable in any setting. Charlotte was already seated at a corner table, her posture rigid with tension. At 29, she looked strikingly like Eleanor had at that age, the same high cheekbones and determined chin, though Charlotte's carefully highlighted hair and designer clothes created a polished veneer Eleanor had never sought for herself. "Mom," Charlotte nodded as Eleanor took her seat. No hug, no kiss on the cheek, a formality between them that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Charlotte," Eleanor replied, keeping her tone warm despite her daughter's coolness. "You look well." A server appeared to take their drink orders, providing a momentary reprieve from the immediate need for conversation. Once he departed, Charlotte leaned forward, her voice low but intense. "I think we need to clear the air about a few things." Eleanor nodded, allowing her daughter to set the direction of the conversation. First, Charlotte continued, I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. The decision about the wedding was about creating a specific atmosphere, not about rejecting you as my mother. Eleanor considered this distinction carefully. Charlotte, when you exclude someone from a significant life event explicitly because of who they are, how they dress, how they speak, what stories they might tell, it is a rejection of their authentic self. Intention doesn't change that impact. Charlotte's expression tightened. This is exactly what I mean. You turn everything into a lesson, an opportunity to educate everyone about the deeper meaning of things. Not everything has to be a profound statement about values and authenticity. Sometimes a wedding is just a wedding. Is it? Eleanor asked gently. Is your wedding just a wedding, or is it a carefully orchestrated statement about who you are, who the Whitakers are, and who you aspire to become in their world? The question hung between them as the server returned with their drinks. Charlotte took a long sip of her white wine before responding. The Whitakers have connections that could significantly advance both our careers. Their social circle includes people who can open doors neither Brendan nor I could access on our own. Is it wrong to care about that? Caring about career opportunities isn't wrong, Eleanor acknowledged. But when you prioritize those connections over genuine relationships, when you exclude your mother from your wedding because she doesn't project the right image for your networking goals, you're making a clear statement about what you value most. Charlotte's eyes flashed with irritation. That's not fair. I value our relationship. I just needed this one day to be exactly right, exactly as we planned it. And I would ruin that perfection, Eleanor stated simply. Not a question, just a clear articulation of the underlying message Charlotte had been sending. You're twisting my words, Charlotte protested, but her tone lacked conviction. Am I? Eleanor asked. Charlotte, I've had 3 weeks to process. Being told I'm not welcome at my daughter's wedding because I'm too ordinary, too authentic, too much myself. I've moved from hurt to understanding. What I'd like to know now is whether you've given similar thought to what your decision reveals. About your priorities. The server approached again, this time to take their dinner orders. Both women requested simple pasta dishes, neither particularly hungry despite the restaurant's excellent reputation. When they were alone again, Charlotte sighed, some of her defensive posture collapsing. I've seen your interviews. The article. The news segment. You've become some kind of spokesperson for excluded parents. That wasn't my intention, Eleanor explained. I was trying to make sense of a painful experience, to find meaning in it. Connecting with others in similar situations has helped me process my own feelings. Well, it's created complications, Charlotte said, her tone sharpening again. Mrs. Whitaker called me yesterday, after seeing you on the news. She suggested that perhaps we had been hasty in our decision to limit the guest list. Suddenly she's concerned about how it looks to exclude my mother, rather than how it looks to include you. Eleanor couldn't help but smile slightly at the irony. Image concerns working in my favor for once. This isn't funny, Mom, Charlotte snapped. The wedding is in 4 days. The seating arrangements are finalized, the place cards are printed, everything is choreographed down to the minute. Changing anything now would be a logistical nightmare. I'm not asking you to change anything, Eleanor pointed out. You made your decision, and I've accepted it. I won't be attending your wedding. Charlotte stared at her mother with growing frustration. So that's it? You've made your point, become a minor celebrity speaking about excluded parents, and now you're refusing to come even if invited? I didn't say that, Eleanor corrected gently. I said I've accepted your decision. If you were to genuinely change your mind, not because of the Whitakers' concern about appearances, but because you truly want your mother at your wedding, that would be different. Their entrees arrived, steam rising from plates of pasta. Neither woman had much appetite to eat. They picked at their food in tense silence before Charlotte spoke again. Why did you have to make this so public? She asked, her voice smaller now. Couldn't you have just been hurt privately? The question struck at the heart of their different approaches to life. Charlotte had always been concerned with external perceptions, with managing impressions, with controlling the narrative. Eleanor had always valued transparency, authenticity, the messy truth of lived experience. Charlotte, Eleanor said carefully, when painful things happen, we have choices about how to respond. I could have retreated into private hurt, yes. But instead, I chose to connect my experience to something larger, to use it to help others. Feeling the same isolation and shame. That's been my approach to difficulties throughout my life, finding the deeper meaning, the opportunity for growth, the chance to help others through shared experience. And that's admirable in theory, Charlotte conceded, but did you consider how it would affect me? My relationship with the Whitakers? My wedding? I considered it, Eleanor acknowledged. But I also considered my own need to process this. Rejection in a way that felt authentic to me. You made a choice that prioritized your needs over my feelings. I made choices that prioritized my healing over your comfort. Perhaps we're more alike than either of us realized. This observation landed visibly on Charlotte, who set down her fork and looked directly at her mother with new awareness. I never thought of it that way. We're both strong-willed women who know what we want, Eleanor continued. You want a wedding that projects a certain image and advances your social connections. I want to live authentically and help others do the same. The conflict between us isn't about right versus wrong, it's about different values and priorities. Their conversation continued through dinner, not resolving the fundamental tension but creating space for mutual understanding that had been absent in their previous interactions. By the time they ordered coffee, a tentative truce had emerged. I need to think about all of this, Charlotte said finally. The wedding is in 4 days, and I can't promise any changes to the plans. But I hear what you're saying about authenticity versus appearance, and it's making me question some of the choices we've made. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand briefly. That's all I can ask. Whatever you decide about the wedding, I love you. That hasn't changed. As they parted in the restaurant parking lot, Charlotte hesitated before giving her mother a quick, awkward hug. I'll call you tomorrow, she promised. Eleanor drove home through the quiet streets of Oakridge, the conversation replaying in her mind. She had no illusions about a dramatic reconciliation or last-minute wedding invitation. Charlotte's concern about logistical complications was real, as was the deeply ingrained pattern of prioritizing appearance over authenticity that had led to the original exclusion. But something had shifted between them, a willingness to acknowledge the valid perspectives on both sides, a recognition that their conflict reflected genuine value differences rather than simple rejection. It wasn't resolution, but it was movement in a healthier direction. The following morning, Eleanor received an unexpected call from Margot Wilson, the journalist whose article had first brought attention to her situation. Eleanor, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to give you a heads up. I've been approached by several national media outlets interested in your story. The original article has gone viral in certain circles, especially after your TV appearance. Eleanor felt a flutter of apprehension. What kind of media outlets? Morning shows, mostly. They're interested in the broader cultural conversation about weddings becoming performances rather than authentic celebrations. Your story has become a touchpoint for discussing these issues. The timing couldn't be worse. National media attention just days before Charlotte's wedding would only intensify the pressure and scrutiny on all involved. Margot, I appreciate the warning, but I need to step back from additional media engagement. For now. My daughter's wedding is this weekend, and while I won't be attending, I don't want to create additional complications for her. I understand completely, Margot assured her. I'll let them know you're declining interviews at this time. But Eleanor, what you've started here, this conversation about authenticity versus appearance, about the commercialization of life milestones, it's resonating far beyond what either of us anticipated. You've given voice to something many people have been feeling but couldn't articulate. After ending the call with Margot, Eleanor faced a difficult decision. The podcast interview with Dr. Hayes was scheduled to be released the following day, just 3 days before the wedding. While she couldn't prevent its release, she could choose whether to promote it on her newly established social media accounts, where she had been sharing resources for excluded parents. After careful consideration, Eleanor decided on a middle path. She would acknowledge the podcast's release but refrain from additional commentary or media engagement until after Charlotte's wedding had passed. This felt like the right balance between continuing the important conversation she had started and respecting her daughter's special day. She had just made this decision when her phone rang again, Charlotte, calling much earlier than expected. Mom, her daughter began without preamble, I've been up all night thinking about our conversation. About authenticity and appearance, about what kind of statement I'm making with this wedding. And I realized something important. Eleanor waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever realization her daughter had reached. I've been so focused on creating the perfect wedding that I lost sight of what we're actually celebrating: love, commitment, family. And while I still believe in creating a beautiful event, I've been making decisions based on fear rather than love. Fear? Eleanor prompted gently. Fear of not measuring up to the Whitakers' standards. Fear of not fitting into their world. Fear of saying or doing the wrong thing and closing doors that might never open again. Charlotte's voice grew stronger as she continued. But that's not who I want to be, Mom. That's not the foundation I want for my marriage. Eleanor felt a surge of pride in her daughter's self-awareness. That's a powerful realization, Charlotte. Which brings me to the reason for my call, Charlotte continued. I still can't change most of the wedding arrangements at this point. The venue, the flowers, the menu, it's all locked in. But I can change the guest list. And I want you there, Mom. Not because the Whitakers are now concerned about how your absence looks, but because you're my mother and this day wouldn't be complete without you. Eleanor felt tears gathering but kept her voice steady. Are you sure, Charlotte? I don't want to be a source of stress or conflict on your wedding day. I'm sure, Charlotte said firmly. Brendan and I talked about it all night. He never agreed. With excluding you, he was just trying to keep peace with his mother. But after seeing how this has affected both of us, he's fully supportive of having you there. And honestly, after your media appearances, I think the Whitakers are more worried about how it would look if you're not there. Eleanor couldn't help but laugh at the irony. So much for avoiding appearances. I know, right? Charlotte's laugh joined hers, the first moment of genuine connection they'd shared in weeks. But Mom, this isn't about appearances anymore. The invitation, while meaningful, now presented Eleanor with a complex decision of her own. After weeks of processing her exclusion, after becoming a voice for authentic relationships over perfect appearances, after building connections with other excluded parents, did she want to attend a wedding that had initially rejected her presence? Would attending undermine the message of dignity and self-worth she had been advocating? Charlotte, I appreciate this more than I can express, Eleanor said carefully. But I need a little time to think about it. This isn't about punishing you or making a point, it's about making sure that whatever decision I make aligns with the values I've been discussing these past weeks. Charlotte's disappointment was audible. I understand. Just, please let me know soon? The wedding is Saturday, and we'd need to make arrangements. I'll call you tomorrow morning, Eleanor promised. And Charlotte? Thank you for reconsidering. Regardless of what happens with the wedding, it means a great deal to know you've been reflecting on these issues. After hanging up, Eleanor called the one person whose perspective she trusted most on this matter, Diane from Celebrations of Authenticity. This is exactly the scenario many excluded parents dream of, Diane observed after hearing the situation. The child reconsiders, extends a genuine invitation, acknowledges the hurt they caused. But I understand your hesitation too. Accepting the invitation now could seem like validating the initial exclusion, like saying it was okay to treat you as disposable until it became inconvenient. That's part of it, Eleanor agreed. But there's something else too. These past weeks, I've developed a platform, a voice for discussing authentic relationships versus performative celebrations. If I simply return to the wedding as if nothing happened, am I undermining that message? Diane considered this thoughtfully. Or are you demonstrating what reconciliation can look like when both parties reflect on their values and priorities? Eleanor, you've never advocated for permanent estrangement or refusing genuine overtures for reconnection. You've talked about maintaining dignity while keeping doors open for authentic relationship. This perspective shifted something in Eleanor's thinking. Perhaps attending the wedding, not as a silent, compliant mother who accepted whatever treatment was offered, but as a woman who had spoken her truth, stood in her dignity, and remained open to genuine reconciliation, could be the most powerful demonstration of the values she had been advocating. The question isn't whether to attend, Diane continued, but how to attend. Not as someone desperate for inclusion at any cost, but as someone who values authentic connection and recognizes a genuine change in your daughter's perspective. By the time their conversation ended, Eleanor had reached clarity about her decision. She would attend Charlotte's wedding, not as a victory or surrender, but as a mindful choice to honor a relationship that, while imperfect, remained precious to her. The following morning, she called Charlotte with her answer. I would be honored to attend your wedding, Eleanor said simply. Thank you for reconsidering and for your honesty about the process that led you there. Charlotte's relief was palpable. Thank you, Mom. I know this hasn't been easy for either of us, but I think we'll both be glad you're there. As they discussed practical details, what time Eleanor should arrive, where she would be seated, what colors she might wear to complement the wedding palette, Eleanor sensed a new quality in their interaction. The tension hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something more honest, more grounded in mutual respect rather than unspoken expectations and assumptions. With just 3 days until the wedding, Eleanor faced a practical challenge. She hadn't anticipated finding appropriate attire for a high society wedding on short notice. Her usual wardrobe of professional attire for school functions wouldn't meet the standards of what promised to be the social event of the season in Cincinnati's elite circles. Gabriela Martinez offered a solution during their lunch break. My sister Lucia owns a boutique in Columbus that carries designer consignment. She could help you find something perfect that won't break the bank, and more importantly, something that feels authentic to who you are while still fitting the formal setting. The following afternoon, Eleanor made the drive to Columbus, where Lucia welcomed her warmly. Gabriella told me about your situation, she said as she led Eleanor through the carefully curated racks of evening wear. I think we can find something that honors both the occasion and your personal style. After trying several options, Eleanor settled on a deep teal silk dress with clean lines and understated elegance. It was more formal than anything she would have chosen for herself, but it felt authentic rather than costumey, refined without being pretentious. You look magnificent, Lucia declared as Eleanor examined her reflection. Distinguished, elegant, but completely yourself. This is how mother of the bride should look, present, dignified, authentic. As Eleanor prepared to pay for the dress, a fraction of its original designer price but still more than she'd ever spent on a single item of clothing, Lucia stopped her. This one's on the house, she said firmly. Consider it my contribution to authentic celebration. Just promise to send me a photo of you wearing it at the wedding. The gesture touched Eleanor deeply, another reminder of how her personal journey had connected her to a community of people who valued authenticity over appearance while still recognizing the importance of honoring significant occasions appropriately. When Dr. Hayes's podcast was released on Thursday, Eleanor listened to it alone in her garden, surrounded by the roses she had tended for decades. Hearing her own voice discussing the tension between authentic relationships and performative celebrations, she felt a strange sense of distance from the person she had been just weeks ago, the excluded mother processing raw rejection through intellectual analysis. Now, with Charlotte's wedding just 2 days away and a tentative reconciliation in progress, Eleanor heard both wisdom and limitations in her earlier perspective. She had been right about the cultural forces transforming weddings into performances, right about the damage done when authenticity was sacrificed for appearance. But perhaps she had underestimated the potential for growth and change, the possibility that genuine reflection could lead to reconnection on more authentic terms. As the podcast concluded, Eleanor made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. She would attend Charlotte's wedding not just as a quietly rehabilitated mother of the bride, but as someone who had learned valuable lessons from this painful experience, lessons that might benefit others facing similar challenges. She called Charlotte one more time, to discuss an unexpected addition to the wedding proceedings that would either heal their relationship more fully or create a final, irreparable rift between them. The conversation was tense but productive, ending with Charlotte's reluctant agreement to Eleanor's proposal. It's a risk, Charlotte acknowledged, but maybe it's one worth taking. As Saturday approached, Eleanor prepared herself mentally and emotionally for what promised to be one of the most challenging days of her life, returning to a celebration that had initially deemed her unworthy of inclusion, navigating the complex dynamics of the Whittaker family's social circle, and potentially taking a public stand for authenticity in the heart of a wedding designed to project perfection. The wedding was scheduled for 4 p.m. at the Whittaker family estate, a sprawling property in one of Cincinnati's most exclusive neighborhoods. Eleanor would arrive at 3 o'clock, joining the immediate family for pre-ceremony photographs, a last-minute addition that had required rearranging the meticulously planned schedule. As she laid out her teal silk dress and the simple pearl jewelry that had belonged to her mother, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions: anticipation, apprehension, determination, and hope that tomorrow might represent not just her daughter's new beginning, but a transformation in their relationship that would endure long after the perfect photos had faded. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect early autumn day that wedding planners dream about. Eleanor woke before her alarm, the weight of the day ahead making sleep impossible. She moved through her morning routine with deliberate care, taking time for meditation and a quiet cup of tea in her garden, small rituals that had sustained her through the tumultuous weeks since Charlotte's initial rejection. At precisely noon, Eleanor began preparing for the wedding. She styled her silver-streaked hair in a simple but elegant updo, applied makeup that enhanced her features without attempting to disguise her age, and finally slipped into the teal silk dress that felt like armor and affirmation simultaneously. The woman who gazed back from the mirror looked poised, dignified, and entirely herself, exactly what she had advocated for throughout this journey. "Well, James," she said softly to her late husband's photograph, "I don't think either of us imagined Charlotte's wedding day quite like this. But I think you'd be proud of how we've handled it." She touched the simple gold band she still wore on her right hand, drawing strength from the memory of a marriage built on authentic connection, rather than social aspiration. The drive to Cincinnati passed in contemplative silence. Eleanor had declined Michael's offer to accompany her, knowing this was a journey she needed to make alone. Her son had supported her throughout the ordeal, ready to defend his mother's honor against his sister's rejection, but Eleanor had consistently discouraged him from taking sides. Family healing couldn't come through division. The Whittaker estate emerged like a vision from another era, a sprawling Georgian mansion set amid manicured grounds, with white tents dotting the extensive lawn where the reception would be held. Staff directed Eleanor to a private parking area reserved for immediate family, a small but significant acknowledgement of her restored status. As Eleanor approached the house, Charlotte emerged from the front door, already dressed in her wedding gown, a breathtaking confection of lace and silk that managed to be both traditional and fashion-forward. For a moment, mother and daughter simply gazed at each other across the circular drive, the weeks of tension suspended in the recognition of the milestone before them. "Mom," Charlotte said finally, her voice catching slightly. "You look beautiful." "As do you," Eleanor replied, emotion making her own voice unsteady. "Truly beautiful." They embraced carefully, mindful of Charlotte's dress and elaborate hairstyle. But the hug lingered longer than either had anticipated. When they separated, Charlotte's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. "It wouldn't have been right without you." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world." The moment was interrupted by the appearance of Victoria Whittaker, resplendent in a pale blue ensemble that Eleanor recognized as designer couture. Her expression was difficult to read, not openly hostile but certainly guarded. "Miss Parker," she acknowledged. With a nod. "Welcome to our home." "Thank you for having me," Eleanor replied with genuine warmth, refusing to perpetuate tension on her daughter's wedding day. "Your property is stunning." Victoria seemed momentarily disarmed by Eleanor's sincerity. "Yes, well, it's been in the Whittaker family for 4 generations. We're very proud of its history." She glanced at her watch. "The photographer is waiting in the rose garden for family portraits. Charlotte, you should touch up your makeup before we begin." As Charlotte disappeared inside with her future mother-in-law, Eleanor took a moment to center herself. The next few hours would require all her emotional resilience, navigating complex family dynamics, encountering the very people who had deemed her unsuitable, and ultimately delivering the brief toast she had negotiated with Charlotte. The family portrait session proved less awkward than Eleanor had feared. The photographer was a consummate professional who directed everyone with cheerful efficiency, creating natural groupings that eased the potential tension between the Parker and Whittaker families. Brendan, Charlotte's fiancé, greeted Eleanor with genuine warmth, his relief at her presence evident in his relaxed smile. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly during a moment when the photographer was rearranging the group. "Charlotte's been different since you two reconnected, more herself, somehow. Less concerned with impressing my parents." The observation touched Eleanor deeply. Perhaps their conflict, painful as it had created space for authentic growth that might not have happened otherwise. Benjamin Whittaker approached Eleanor as the photo session concluded, offering his arm to escort her to the ceremony area. "We haven't been properly introduced," he said. "I'm Benjamin Whittaker, Brendan's father." "Eleanor Parker," she replied, accepting his arm with a gracious smile. "Thank you for welcoming me today." "It's our pleasure," he said, and something in his tone suggested genuine sincerity rather than mere social politeness. "Charlotte speaks very highly of you, your work in education, your influence in your community. She clearly admires you enormously." This aligned with what Victoria had said during their phone call, yet it contrasted sharply with Charlotte's actions in excluding her. Eleanor was beginning to understand the complex dynamics at play, a daughter simultaneously proud of her mother's authentic values and anxious about how those values might be perceived in a social world that prioritized very different qualities. "We often see our parents most clearly when we step back from them," Eleanor observed. "Sometimes that distance is physical, sometimes emotional. But the perspective it provides can be valuable, even when painful." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "A wise observation. Victoria and I have been reflecting on similar themes recently, the values we've emphasized in our family, the messages we've sent about what matters most. Your public discussions about authenticity versus appearance have been thought-provoking." Before Eleanor could respond, they reached the ceremony area, an exquisite garden pavilion where 200 white chairs had been arranged in perfect rows, facing an altar adorned with cascading white orchids and greenery. Guests were already being seated by ushers in formal attire, the men and women in attendance representing a who's who of Cincinnati society just as Charlotte had described. Eleanor was escorted to her seat in the front row, the traditional place for the mother of the bride, a position she had never expected to occupy after Charlotte's initial decision. As she settled into the elegantly appointed chair, she felt a momentary pang of anxiety. Would these people, clearly members of an elite social circle she had never aspired to join, see her as the embarrassing mother who had nearly been excluded? Would they judge her provincial clothes and mannerisms as the Whittakers initially had? Then she remembered the journey of the past month, the painful growth, the connections she had formed with others who valued authenticity, the platform she had developed for discussing what truly mattered in celebrations and relationships. Eleanor Parker had nothing to prove to anyone in this garden. She was exactly who she was meant to be, a mother who had raised her children with love and values, an educator who had positively influenced thousands of young lives, a woman who had faced rejection with dignity and emerged stronger for the experience. The ceremony itself was breathtaking in its elegance yet surprisingly personal in its content. Charlotte and Brendan had written their own vows, and Eleanor felt tears gathering as her daughter promised to build a marriage based on authentic connection, mutual respect, and shared values. There was no mention of career advancement or social aspiration, only love, commitment, and the creation of a genuine partnership. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled guests erupted in applause. Eleanor watched her daughter's radiant smile, recognizing in it a joy that transcended the perfectly orchestrated setting. In that moment, Charlotte wasn't performing happiness for photographers or impressing the Whitakers' social circle, she was simply, authentically happy. The cocktail hour that followed the ceremony gave Eleanor her first opportunity to interact with the wider guest list. She had prepared herself for polite dismissal or barely concealed curiosity from people who had likely heard rumors about the mother of the bride's near exclusion. Instead, she found herself approached by guests who recognized her from her media appearances. "Miss Parker," said an elegant woman in her 60s, introducing herself as a board member of Cincinnati's largest arts foundation. "Your discussion on Dr. Hayes's podcast about authenticity in celebration was fascinating. Have you considered expanding those ideas into a book? There's significant interest in reclaiming meaningful ritual in our increasingly performative culture." Similar conversations followed, thoughtful people who had connected with Eleanor's message about prioritizing genuine connection over perfect appearance. Far from being the embarrassing element Charlotte had feared, Eleanor found herself engaged in some of the most substantive conversations at the reception. Even Victoria Whitaker seemed to be reassessing her initial judgment. Eleanor noticed her future in-law observing these interactions from across the garden, her expression shifting from surprise to something approaching respect. The reception moved seamlessly from cocktails to a formal dinner under the spectacular white tents. Eleanor was seated at the head table between Michael and Benjamin Whitaker, a place of honor that symbolized her restored position in the celebration. The meal was exquisite, the wine perfectly paired, the service impeccable. Everything about the event reflected the careful planning and considerable expense Charlotte had described. Yet Eleanor observed something interesting as the evening progressed. For all the perfection of the setting, what guests responded to most warmly were the authentic moments: Charlotte's spontaneous laughter during Brendan's toast, the genuine emotion in Benjamin Whitaker's welcome to his new daughter-in-law, the obvious affection between the couple as they moved among their guests. These unscripted, authentic moments created the true magic of the celebration, not the designer dresses or the perfectly matched floral arrangements or the string quartet playing classical selections in the background. The genuine connections between people, the real emotions being expressed and witnessed, these were what transformed a beautiful event into a meaningful milestone. As dinner concluded and the traditional toasts began, Eleanor prepared herself for the moment she had negotiated with Charlotte. After Brendan's best man delivered a charming speech about friendship and growth, the wedding planner approached Eleanor, quietly confirming that she would speak next. Eleanor rose, champagne glass in hand, feeling the attention of 200 guests focusing on her. The mother of the bride who had nearly been excluded was now about to address the celebration. A development that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. "For those who don't know me," she began, her educator's voice carrying clearly through the tent without seeming forced, "I'm Eleanor Parker, Charlotte's mother. And I'm enormously grateful to be sharing this day with my daughter and her wonderful new husband." She paused, making eye contact with Charlotte, who offered an encouraging smile despite the tension evident in her posture. "The journey to this moment has been unexpected," Eleanor continued, acknowledging the elephant in the room with characteristic directness. "Charlotte and I have had to navigate some challenging conversations about values, priorities, and what truly matters in both celebrations and relationships. Those conversations weren't always comfortable, but they were necessary and ultimately valuable." A murmur rippled through the guests, but Eleanor continued with quiet confidence. "What I've learned through this process, what perhaps we've all learned, is that authentic connection matters more than perfect appearance. Real relationships require us to see and accept each other fully, not just the carefully curated versions we present to the world." Eleanor turned slightly to address Charlotte and Brendan directly. "My wish for your marriage is that you build it on this foundation of authenticity. That you create a partnership where you can be fully yourselves, where your worth isn't measured by external metrics but by the depth of your connection and the integrity of your shared values." She raised her glass, emotion making her voice richer rather than weaker. To Charlotte and Brendan, may your marriage be as authentic as it is beautiful, as rich in meaning as it is in joy. I love you both, and I'm profoundly grateful to be part of this celebration. The applause that followed was immediate and genuine. Charlotte rose from her seat to embrace her mother, tears flowing freely now. Thank you, she whispered against Eleanor's ear. For being here, for being you. The moment represented everything Eleanor had advocated for throughout her unexpected journey: authenticity honored rather than suppressed, genuine emotion valued above perfect appearance, real connection prioritized over impression management. As the formal reception transitioned into dancing and celebration, Eleanor found herself approached by Victoria Whitaker. The woman's formidable composure seemed slightly softened, perhaps by emotion or perhaps by the excellent champagne that had flowed throughout the evening. That was a remarkable toast, Victoria said, her tone difficult to interpret. Not what one typically hears at these events. No, Eleanor agreed simply. I suppose it wasn't. I owe you an apology, Miss Parker, Victoria continued, surprising Eleanor with her directness. My concerns about your inclusion in the wedding were superficial and unworthy. I was so focused on creating the perfect event that I lost sight of what truly matters in a celebration: the authentic relationships being honored. The admission clearly cost Victoria something in terms of pride, making it all the more meaningful. Thank you, Eleanor replied with genuine warmth. And please, call me Eleanor. Eleanor, Victoria amended with a small smile. I wonder if you might consider having lunch next week? I'm chairing the board of the Cincinnati Arts Academy, and your perspective on authentic education would be valuable to our current initiatives. The invitation represented more than a social overture, it was an acknowledgement that Eleanor's values and expertise had worth in Victoria's world, not despite their differences but because of the unique perspective those differences provided. I'd be delighted, Eleanor accepted, recognizing an opportunity to build bridges rather than walls. As the evening continued, Eleanor danced with Michael, with Benjamin Whitaker, and eventually with Brendan, who thanked her with unexpected emotion for the example she had set throughout the difficult weeks leading to the wedding. You showed us what it means to stand in your truth without becoming bitter, he said as they moved across the dance floor. Charlotte and I have had many conversations about what we want our marriage to look like, and your example has influenced those discussions more than you might realize. The most meaningful dance, however, came near the end of the evening when Charlotte sought out her mother for a private moment amid the celebration. I didn't request a formal mother-daughter dance, Charlotte explained as they swayed to the music. It seemed too performative after everything we've discussed. But I did want this moment with you. It's perfect, Eleanor assured her, holding her daughter close. I've been thinking about what you said in your toast, Charlotte continued. About authentic connection versus perfect appearance. Looking back, I can see how much of my life has been driven by concern about how things look rather than how they actually are. We all struggle with that tension, Eleanor acknowledged. The desire to be seen as successful, accomplished, put together, it's deeply human. The challenge is recognizing when that desire begins to undermine what truly matters. Charlotte nodded against her mother's shoulder. The irony is that you've always been the one person in my life who saw me completely and loved me anyway. Yet you were the one I tried to exclude because I was afraid you'd show too much of the real me. The insight showed a self-awareness that made Eleanor profoundly proud of her daughter. Growth often comes through confronting the things we fear most, she observed. Sometimes we have to face rejection to truly value authentic acceptance. As the dance concluded, Charlotte looked at her mother with new understanding. I'm sorry I tried to make you smaller to fit my image of a perfect wedding. Thank you for refusing to be diminished, for showing me another way to be. The celebration continued late into the night, but Eleanor slipped away shortly after midnight, pleasantly exhausted by the emotional intensity of the day. As she drove back to Oakridge under a canopy of stars, she reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past month. From excluded mother to reluctant spokesperson to honored participant in a celebration that had ultimately embraced authenticity alongside elegance. The following morning, Eleanor woke to find her phone flooded with messages. The first was from Charlotte, a simple text that spoke volumes. Thank you for being exactly who you are. I couldn't be prouder to be your daughter. The second was from Diane at Celebrations of Authenticity, sharing the news that Eleanor's toast had been recorded by several guests and was already circulating on social media, resonating with people far beyond the wedding itself. You've created a blueprint for reconciliation with dignity, Diane wrote. People are calling it the Parker Principle, standing in your authentic truth while remaining open to genuine connection. Would you consider leading a workshop on this approach at our next national gathering? Similar messages followed, from Dr. Hayes proposing a follow-up podcast on reconciliation after rejection, from Olivia Chen requesting an additional interview for her dissertation, from Margot Wilson sharing that major publishers were interested in a potential book about Eleanor's journey from excluded mother to advocate for authentic celebration. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.